Hello everyone and welcome back to Dragalia Foundry, a fan channel where everything Dragalia Lost can be found. This video is going to be all about Chapter 25, Part 1 of the main campaign, so careful for story spoilers ahead if you're not caught up to date on everything that's been happening in the main story. This new content update released just a couple days ago at the time of recording, so it came out on April 25th, and because the game's end of service has been announced, we also know that the conclusion of the story, the final chapter, will be Chapter 26, with Part 2 dropping toward the end of July. So we're getting very near to the end of the main Dragalia Lost story here with the first part of Chapter 25, and I have to say this was a pretty enjoyable one. There's clearly some attempts to tie up some loose ends to give some justification for some of the content that we're undergoing in the game as well. But there are also a few nice moments that I wanted to highlight, so like always in these story update videos, I like to share my thoughts and impressions on everything that happened in the chapter while showing off some gameplay footage of the unique quests and maps that are available in the chapter. You can see here I have my team of some of my favorite adventurers, led by Yuden for that player EXP of course, Pietro, Eleonora, and then Kimono Knot round out the team. So I'll be using them for all these quests, and we'll see how much of it we're able to get through auto and whether we have to actually step in. But anyway, while that plays in the background, I want to talk about the story this time around. So for this first half of the chapter, we pick up after the advent of the Origin raid event. That was our 3.5-year anniversary raid event, and it centered around us facing off against the true form of the progenitor, the true form of the Origin. Still get those mixed up sometimes. But anyway, the Origin, also known as Bahamut or True Bahamut, is the end boss for that event. And we're also trying to rescue Auriga in that event from Satan's yoke so she could rejoin the rest of the Auspexes and they could cultivate and develop their powers as Auspexes to create worlds. That's how it's described in game. I think of it as sort of like a localized reality or the ability to kind of fix elements of causality down the future, so to prevent things from happening. It kind of looks like undoing time, the way that it's presented in the game at points, but it's a power similar to what Baron has and is able to almost fully tap into, and what the progenitor has as well, or Xenos as he's known. So we pick up after this event, and the chapter starts off with some justification as to why we have the Primal Dragon Trials in place. Basically, the Primal Dragon Trials are a challenge to the Auspexes by the dragons with their primal power awakened to more quickly unlock their abilities as Auspexes. It honestly seems like kind of a flimsy justification, but it is actually pretty cool and poignant to see at a point during the chapter Ilya clash against Midgardsormr. As you can see, he's the boss of this fight. But I think that's a nice moment just thinking back to the fact that Ilya and Midgardsormr did have a special relationship back in the day. And one thing that stood out to me with the Auspexes, they're Sheila, Auriga, Zaina, Zethia, and Ilya. There is no wind element one, which felt a little bit off. So I like the fact that we did get Ilya in there taking on the trial against Midgardsormr. That felt appropriate in its own way. And that was really fun to me. Also happening in the story, so this is basically like a way that the writers kind of take the Auspexes somewhat off screen and also bring in the fact that, okay, why are we fighting the Primal Dragons? I think maybe in the original plan, we were going to fight them in the Dragon Necropolis. Maybe that was going to last a while longer. Or maybe this was always the intent. Who knows? But anyway, the other piece to the story this time around is that tears in space-time or tears in reality to the space between worlds start to appear across the land, and Yuden actually gets sucked into one. And one short scene that takes place before this, which I want to highlight, is there's a moment between Yuden and Elisan, which was also really touching and kind of felt like a payoff to Elisan's arc in a way and her admiration for and service to Yuden. I wonder if we're going to get stuff like that with the other main characters. I really hope so. because there are a lot of parallels in this chapter, even as the bosses are different. But this chapter takes place near the Mistholt and near the Halidom, so it's really similar to the very first chapter of the game in that regard, where we got our main cast introduced. I'm kind of hoping we'll get more scenes like that one with Elisanne, but basically Elisanne swears her fealty to the prince, to Yuden, and makes it clear that she's going to stand by him through thick and thin. And it's a nice moment for her, but of course, just as she pledges her loyalty to him and to protect him, yada yada, he gets sucked into one of these vortexes or rifts in space that takes him into the space between worlds. And once there, Yuden doesn't know how he's going to get out. He's sort of being consumed by the black mana around him, and he observes what looks sort of like a black hole. That's probably the best way to describe it. But we come to find out is kind of like a representation of Xenos, or the progenitor's stronghold, in this space between worlds. And all of these lights in this space are different worlds that are being consumed by this stronghold and transformed into raw materials. And I think it's a really powerful image for what the progenitor is trying to do. Sometimes it can be kind of hard to think through the different realities or different timelines in Dragalia Lost, but I feel like a good metaphor visually for that is the idea of different planets in space, right? So you could think of the different raw materials on different planets just being harnessed by some sort of galactic level power just for their home world or for their own sake or for their one true reality that they're trying to create. It was a pretty cool moment to me, and the character to explain it was none other than Mordecai. So Mordecai finally comes back into the fold in this chapter, and he's the one, with him being from the space between worlds, that's able to navigate in there and get Yuden out and sort of rescue him and make sure that he's able to return to his reality properly. And he explains all of this to Yuden, and also explains that Mordecai's true identity, his true identity, is the forsaken heart of Xenos, the progenitor. It's a part of the progenitor cast aside that he deemed was no longer necessary, which at this point is Nomura on the writing team. I mean, come on. It's so Kingdom Hearts-like, isn't it? But he is the forsaken heart of the progenitor, deemed to be no longer necessary, so I guess that means that Xenos is literally a heartless. Anyway, before I digress too much down that path, it did feel kind of ridiculous, but also sort of satisfying, and it's the reason Mordecai explains that he's able to kind of sense the intentions of the progenitor and has this special connection, and also why he had a special connection with Ilia as one of the primal mark, as an Auspex, because they have a connection to the progenitor too, with that ability to affect worlds or create worlds. So that's all kind of explained and laid out, and I guess that also means there's kind of a connection between Yuden and Mordecai, because Mordecai manifesting as the other, we know Yuden comes from the other too, and I think that was kind of a nice little moment there as well. And despite the animosity some of our party has had toward the other, like Ronzel, for all the trouble that the other has caused, we're able to reconcile that with Mordecai being part of our team proper, and it feels like things are going fairly well. We know at that same time Ilia's facing off against Midgard-Sormr, the trials are proceeding apace, so we're kind of preparing for the ultimate battle in this chapter, and then that's when chaos descends. And as you know, if you've played any other Nomura games, you know, you have to kill chaos. But anyway, seriously, what I'm talking about, of course, is that Baron and Xenos appear, and they're not going to stand by while we prepare to overtake them. So they appear prepared to thwart our plans, and it seems like the one Auspex, based on the preview of the second half of the chapter, the one Auspex who's really having trouble awakening her powers is Xena. And so because of that, I think that the next chapter is really going to be focused on her. I think that's a nice choice, given that she's a character who's been with us since the prologue of the game. She's one of the first characters with her mask that you see when you first start playing Dragalia Lost, so I wouldn't be surprised if in the next half chapter something happens with the Dawn Shard or with her removing her tether to her world, her old world, in order to stand up to the progenitor and awaken her powers as an Auspex. I was happy that Xenos and Baron showed up, in part because I really hope there's space between now and the end of the main campaign for almost like an epilogue or just more moments like the one between Ellie and Yuden. Just more moments to see like what do these characters go on to do after they save the world, which we can presume is going to happen. Although I will say at this point my antenna has gone up quite a few times for us to get Isekai here and Truck-kun to show up at some point in the series. Like, it would not surprise me if that's the direction things take either. But ultimately, right now I feel like there's going to be a good ending, a happy ending, where we stop the progenitor and we stop the progenitor's stronghold and everybody makes it out okay. And then I just hope that we get some resolution of like, what happens after that? Do they all live happily ever after? Do dragons and humans live in harmony forever more? I mean, I just want a little bit of that too. So I'm hoping that's not overlooked, but I'm glad that we're getting this proper conclusion. It's definitely been a bummer knowing that the game is going to be ending soon, but this does feel like a pretty exciting way to send it off. And some of these boss fights, you could see that they were pretty challenging on autoplay with this team, and required a little bit of intervention at points, but they're pretty enjoyable themselves. And with this releasing at the same time as Primal Zodiark, it definitely renews my interest in just continuing on with the game and trying to play it out and have fun with it while it lasts. So that's kind of where I stand on the chapter, how things are going for me in Dragalia Lost. I don't have too many other thoughts on the chapter, so I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts about it are in the comments below. I do like the fact that we got these maps with the rifts on the ground, and the cube bosses were a genuine challenge at points in this one, so that was a fun touch too. Maybe we'll get a fight where we fight one cube of each element. I could imagine that being pretty chaotic, so that might be a fun way to proceed next half chapter. But we'll see what happens. That's going to be releasing at the end of May. Then we have Chapter 26 Part 1 at the end of April, and then finally, at the end of June, and then finally at the end of July, Chapter 26 Part 2. And that'll pretty much do it for the main campaign. I don't know. It doesn't seem likely that there will be another new event in Dragalia Lost. More and more. I mean, we know there's going to be reruns, but it was also told to us in the EOS message that certain quests would be the exception along with the main campaign. So I do feel like maybe there's an off chance of one final raid event or something like that as being one of those certain events. We are not going to be getting a This Month in Dragalia Lost for May as far as we know. We know the last one happened already, so if it does come, it's going to be in a different form or something like that, maybe separate news posts. But it's not to say things aren't still happening. So the next thing on my list for this week is going to be to work on Kaleidoscape and try clear through level 60, make a video about that. So expect that sometime between now and the weekend. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. That is going to do it for today. Take care, and I'll see you next time.